Good morning, guys. I'm Tori, and this is my teammate Carol. Today, we will be presenting on the topics of human biospecimen and the ethical issues behind this. Human biospecimens are an important part of the scientific and medical research. Discoveries from the biospecimen have led us to new understanding of the human body and diseases. However, the ethical issues with human biospecimen research have long been the subject of debate. One of the most representative cases that is worth looking into is Henrietta Lacks and her immortal cells. But before we get into our research on the relevant socio-historical factors and discussion of all the ethical issues behind this, let's explain the background first. Henrietta Lacks was an African-American woman who died in 1953 at the age of 31 due to an aggressive cervical cancer. Several months before her death, her doctor from Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore had taken some samples of her cancerous cell for the use of diagnosis and treatment. George Gay, the head of tissue culture lab at that time, had discovered that Lacks cells are able to survive for a long time outside of the human body and replicate. That was a huge discovery back then because nobody was able to keep human cells alive for a long time outside of the body. Without acknowledging Lacks herself nor any of her family members, Gay shared the cells worldwide with numerous scientists. The cancerous cells of Lacks, also known as the famous HeLa cells, has soon become an important role in the biological field for research. Even though Gay did not make any profit from this, he didn't give any credit to Lacks either. Lacks family weren't aware of the situation until 1973, when researchers from Johns Hopkins approached them for blood samples to find out more about the mysterious HeLa cells. It's not until 2010 when the book The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks was published. The attention of the public was finally drawn to Lacks' story. Today, HeLa cells have been used in key discoveries of many fields, such as cancer, vaccine, immunology, and so on. The controversy continues to grow. Without any concern to Lacks' family, the HeLa genome was published in 2013 by the European Molecular Biology Lab in Germany. This act could have revealed some of the private genetic information about Lacks' relatives. Later, a compromise known as the HeLa Genome Data Use Agreement was reached. Two of the Lacks family members now sit on the U.S. National Institute of Health Working Group to grant permission for access to the genetic information of HeLa. The case of Lacks played a critical role in the bioethics field. Lots of countries now have strict rules and laws on the patient's privacy and consent of information to prevent Lacks' situation from happening again in the future. The story of Henrietta Lacks has also pointed out the racial inequalities back then. It's not just in the research and healthcare systems only. Racial inequalities existed everywhere in the whole society back then, and still do exist till today. Johns Hopkins Hospital was one of the few hospitals that provided medical care for African Americans at that time. Many biotechnology firms and companies that have been using Lacks cells to make profits have never passed any money back to her families. Moreover, many years after Lacks' death, they kept failing to ask Lacks' family for permission. There are several relevant socio-historical factors, including social ethics, discrimination, economy, and political. In the context of policy, the situation of Lacks was unusual, as the ground rules for medical ethics and human biospecimen consent were really different back in 1951. As mentioned, scientists, researchers, and Lacks' family have been working together to create more rules around the use of HeLa cells over past years, but more needs to be done. Originally, regulations that intended to protect participants from harm have been interpreted through practice to apply to research on human biospecimens, with identifiability as the key factor. but the research arena has been evolving with rapid confirmation of genomic data would never be truly anonymous. Some studies have indicated that it is possible to discover individuals' identity even their genomic data have been considered as de-identified. These developments come at a time when the public concern about human biospecimen research and consent have been stoked by not only the case of Henrietta Lakes, but also by many other cases, such as the specimen from indigenous people. Action on consent and biospecimen is urgent. More policies are needed to protect human participants' personal information from leaking. In the context of economy, George Gay tried years to get human cells to grow in a lab with the intention to find a cure for cancer by using cell culture. With Lake's cell, he was able to fulfill a big part of his quest. The HeLa cells have brought multi-billion-dollar profits to many industries. According to a report, since the creation of the HeLa cell line, more than 80,000 research articles and 17,000 patents were published with the use of HeLa cells. One of the most famous among all is that Jonas Salk had discovered a vaccine by using these cells to fight polio back in 1954. The development of polio vaccine costed about $35 billion US. However, this vaccine has saved about $180 billion in medical costs in the US alone. Other than economic benefits, this vaccine was able to eradicate the virus in the US in a single generation, taking the fears of paralysis away. One of the most common questions scholars, the author of the book, gets from the readers is that whether Henrietta Lake's family members has received any kind of financial benefits from the profit industries, even though the NIH agreement provides no monetary compensation for the family. Today, in the climate of reckoning with racial injustice, some of the institutes and companies that use HeLa to make profits have offered financial compensation to Lake's family members and others whose bodies were used in research without consent to acknowledge and undo the disparities due to racism. The policies around biospecimens should be informed by a series of considerations. The story of Henrietta Lakes and her family provides an opportunity to reflect on these considerations, including the importance of recognizing and respecting every individual, gender, and race, building and maintaining the trust of patients, facilitating research that holds the promise of contributing to the goal of alleviating suffering and improving human health, and meeting the moral obligation to ensure that the benefits of such research are available to all.
The immortal life of Henrietta Lakes attracted social attention and appeared on the New York Times hardcover bestseller list for more than 11 months and had sold more than 1.25 million copies in the US alone. Many media reported its ethics issues. The New York wrote that the book is a meditation on medical ethics from the first page to the last, on the concept of informed consent, and on the question of who owns human cells. The Washington Post said that the book was an investigation of the social wrongs committed by the medical establishment. The British newspaper The Independent on Sunday described the book as a case study on race and medical ethics, on the issues that plague the black community. Back to that period where racial discrimination is popular within the society. Black people were discriminated by others, and they enjoyed poorly healthcare benefits. Like mentioned before, racial inequality exists in the American research and healthcare system at that time, and the social status of women is very low. None of the biotech or other companies that profited from her sales gave any of the money back to her family, and in the decades since her death, doctors and scientists have not sought her family consent when the public Lake's name, made her medical records available to the media, or even published her cell genome online. Based on the research, informed consent seems like the primary ethical issues. Arguments generated when emphasizing consent. The courts have decided that once a bit of tissue is removed from our bodies, we lose all ownership and have no right to share in any derived profits. However, in an interview with Good, when asked if an individual's organization can be used today without consent, Scoot replied, "There are laws that say you have to be told when scientists do certain things. There is no doubt that Henrietta Lacks and her family should have been given more information and asked for their permission for the researchers to access and use her tissue." Further research mentioned the privacy relating to this case in a report on the PBS program Religion and Ethics News Weekly, which focused on the issue of tissue donation. People said, "If you want to take some my tissue, my cells, and do genetic analysis, you are not only getting to know me, but in a way, at least you are getting to know my relatives, so we have to be very sensitive to the prospect of the privacy." When considering the welfare profits, many articles or news have referred to the historical unethical treatment of blacks by the American medical establishment. Specifically, on the issue of compensation, many commentators or journalists have pointed out that profits generated by HeLa cells and the inability of blacks' family to pay for the health insurance is not equal. When considering the rise to revenue streams, the question raised that whether researchers and institutions should pay Lakes for the potential value of an organization, and in particular whether contributors should have partial rights to any revenue stream generated by their organizations, because neither legal norm nor contemporary practice treat the organization separated from the body as the ongoing property of the individual, thus generating revenue streams. However, in addition to legal liability, thus ethics require that a share of the process be given to individuals whose organization ultimately provides the income for institutions and researchers. Roberts and his co-workers mentioned some points that Lakes may not be offered financial compensation for use of her residue tissue. The first one is that although Lakes does provide the necessary raw material for cell line development, it is the researcher's intellectual contribution, not the patient's, that leads to value creation. Secondly, very few people who can contribute tissue that producing financial blockbusters, so the reward for these people is actually a reward for winning the lottery. It is unfair for other people who have clear contribution in advance but receive nothing. Similarly, in another book, subjects are usually compensated for the time, effort, and cooperation required to participate, while the use of Lake's tissue for biomedical research did not have additional effort or risk on patients, so no compensation for such effort is owed. By looking so many literature research, the authors of all the studies reviewed failed to clearly describe the methodologies and paradigms used in their studies. As a result, reviewers are unable to access the consistency between the stated philosophical views and the methods and objectives of the research. And patient consent to the use of leftover tissue is a complex interaction between many factors and not driven solely by perception of benefits to self or others. It is the truth that Lake, as a poor black woman, did not have access to the medical service. She suffered a lot of injustice. While there is no additional risk or burden for her to use her residue clinical tissue, based on the research, people hold different opinions towards the case for the immortal cell of Henrietta Lacks when considering various social historical factors. Overall, we did not draw on a specific conclusion, and we will look for more research and search more relevant information. And here is our reference. Thank you for watching.